We'll go on and on. George Kilpatrick, inspiration for the nation, celebrating people we feel good about. Well, the long-awaited conversation with Ken Jackson. He is the publisher of the UrbanCNY, over 30 years in the business. I was there when it started. I wasn't there, but I remember when it started. The Syracuse Constitution back in the day, now online. And he is one of the persons in media carrying a long tradition of Black media in Syracuse, telling the story from our perspective, from someone born and raised in this community. So he's seen a few things, right? Living in the shadows of Syracuse University, families impacted by the construction of I-81 in the old 15th Ward. Ken Jackson is here to just tell us what he thinks about what's going on in the community, and there is a lot going on. And he has a column in his own paper called The Hall Monitor, where he gives his thoughts and opinions. He's an award-winning journalist, many awards from the Syracuse Press Club, I believe other national awards as well. So Ken Jackson,
Hi,
welcome
George.
to the program.
Well, thanks for having me.
And we appreciate you. So first of all, welcome to the show. It's not the first time, but it's been a long time.
Right. I believe you were, anyway, it was a long time.
We had you and I had a chance to feat you at the 30th anniversary of the UrbanCNY Syracuse Constitution, which was a great opportunity. Cora Thomas, Dr. Rick Wright, Kenny Dees, right? Back in the day, although that triumvirate does not exist anymore. And so here I am and here you are. And I guess it's on our shoulders pretty much, Ken.
Well, I think that if you look at what's happened in media over the last 10 years, unless you're an owner, you've been weeded out. So you've seen people that have had long, storied careers in media in Syracuse get put aside, and it's a numbers game. And I know I got out of print because print's expensive, distribution's expensive. However, when you start charging, which some publications do, and some may be worth it and some may not be worth it. But I think what's happened now is news has become a consumer product in a different way than it used to be. At one time, a paper was a staple because it cost no more than, say, a cup of coffee. But back then, I mean, when I was in high school, a cup of coffee was 25 cents. So you have this shift in the way we do things, in the way we access information. And unfortunately, I believe it's our industry's fault for the way they dealt with the whole concept of the internet. Because the newspaper was the place that you would go to for the obituaries. You would go to for sales, for a variety of other things. But since we've really divvied up the population, you have certain people who will go to certain sources, which in some cases leaves large holes. When a paper was a quarter or 50 cents, $1, then it's something that you can kind of take out of your change drawer and buy. But when a local paper becomes $3 a day, and then I don't know how much it is on Sunday. However, it then goes from being something that's utilitarian to something that's a budget item. And if you don't have the budget to do that, then you're going to miss the obituaries, which many people have, because that was the go-to place. Now it's really a combination of who sees it online, and then who goes on Facebook, who has the phone numbers, and then that's how the information is getting around. In a way, it's going back to the time before there was media, when in the African-American community, when many of us were on the east side on East Washington Street and Madison Street and Ashworth and Fayette Street. The mother network was the news. So if something happened in the community, that phone would ring and you would know before it was on television. And in some cases, you would see what happened on television, you would start laughing because the mother network may have told you what the story really is. And then several days later, you go, oh, okay, that's the story that I
already heard about, right?
Yeah, I already heard about that.
Right, yeah.
But that was very strong. And I think that that was one of the things that held the communities that were contiguous to the 15th Ward together, because they had their own social activities. We had bars, we had restaurants. While you hear people talk about Hinderwaddles, ask an older person if they remember Cedar Grove. And if they remember Cedar Grove, it was back behind Rock Cut Road. It was way up on a plateau. And you get to the top of the hill, there'd be barbecue, gambling, all kinds of things that when I went to Hinderwaddles, I said, wow, this certainly reminds me of those flashback pictures of a child being in the car. And of course, we couldn't get out because of the gambling and other stuff that was going on. But it reminded me of Cedar Grove. So I think when you look at this community, it's kind of like there's really nothing new. What we're doing is simply replacing things that we've lost in the past. And I think one of the biggest challenges, and I think one of the things that so many people have attempted to do, is recreate the charm of the 15th Ward. And that's not done through tearing down highways and getting rid of historic housing projects. Call it what it is.
Yeah, well, that's interesting.
And call it what it is. Don't name it Blueprint 15, because frankly, Blueprint 15 is in the 9th Ward.
Okay, so excuse me, let's talk about that. So, and as you were speaking, I'm thinking about some of the truth sayers from back in the day, Layman Herring and Willie Morgan and Dr. Robert Pritchard, or Bob Pritchard, as Layman Herring would like to call him. That's like when Mary Wilson would call Diana Ross Diane, right? That's Bob Pritchard, and Kofi Quay and Stanley Dean and yourself bringing it forward, and then from Rochester, CNY Vision and Eddie Morse.
Right, and don't forget Eddie Morse.
Eddie Morse, oh my God,
Eddie Morse had a good run.
The pride of Syracuse, the late Eddie Morse, yeah.
And frankly, I think that because Eddie Morse was around, that forced me to get better. And
y'all had a little run going back in the day.
But the one thing that I've always done was, there's no sunshine for everybody.
Yeah.
So therefore, you have people in the city who think that there only should be one of this or one of that. There's enough room for a variety of things to happen in the city, but people need to open up and realize that no one person or a couple of people can carry the weight of a community on its shoulders. It's ridiculous. That doesn't happen in the white community, nor should that happen in the African-American community.
You alluded to Blueprint 15, and right now at the time of our conversation, people are at the On Center. They are having a conversation about the I-81 project, particularly. So we already know that the decision is about the community grid, but what is the impact of the community grid? And then you mentioned Blueprint 15, which is not the same as I-81, but it's certainly right next to it in terms of impact, and it's going to have an impact one way or the other. So let's first talk about your concern about Blueprint 15, which, for those who don't know, it's a total reimagination. Well, no, let me rephrase that. The current Pioneer Homes and McKinney Manor, from what I understand, would be raised and redeveloped as part of the overall Blueprint 15 project. And then the theory is that those families would then be relocated and then relocated, right? They would be relocated and then relocated back.
I think that in the middle of that sentence, you should have put a period.
Okay, talk to me. Relocated, period. Right?
HUD rules dictate simply if there were 1,500 affordable units or low-income units in Syracuse housing within that acreage, then that's the number that has to be replaced with the new community. However, when you look at the new communities that have been built, they're beautiful communities. However, by the time they're constructed, the people who have lived in those areas, who might have wanted to come back, will have already settled in other communities. So I think that it's one of these things that, frankly, I feel as though instead of trying to dress it up, which is what they kind of did, you can't put lipstick on a pig. And if you look at, I mean, for me and my age, when I was a child, I looked at 81 being built, an entire neighborhood being torn down. It stopped at the corner of my block. So we were spared. However, the people I walked to school with, walked to school and attended school at Washington Irving School, which is now the district headquarters, all that was gone. So there was a certain point where you could stand on, on top of the hill of Harrison and see nothing but empty ground. Everything was gone. And I think what we're seeing now, and what I saw going back into the early 60s, which was the total destruction of a neighborhood, is that we're seeing the same thing all over again with different names. So before it was Urban Renewal and the interstate. Well, now it's Blueprint 15 and removing the interstate.
So you don't, what I'm hearing you say, Ken Jackson, publisher, UrbanCNY, UrbanCNY.com, what I'm hearing you say is that you don't trust the assurances that the leadership and those involved, Allen Foundation, who has a pretty good history of working with in communities to make sure community voices, and hashtag support of this show. I'm just putting that out there so people say, oh no, you just bigging them up because of that. But I'm just pointing that out, right? At the same time, and they're saying, oh, we're going to make sure that they've hired a firm out of Atlanta, I believe, to help to ensure that the communities are rebuilt according to what they say they are going to be about. I'm hearing you say, I don't trust that.
I'm not saying I don't trust that. All I'm saying is that as you progress towards the future, don't forget the past. One of the things that I did as a college senior, I had the honor of being able to come back to Syracuse from Ithaca College and study the original Urban Renewal Plan. And what really surprised me more than anything was the progressive vision in that plan, where you had a new city hall, a new justice center, a new Everson Museum that was part of an entire plaza downtown. There was actually a plan within that urban renewal concept of putting a performance theater within Thorndon Park. But there were a lot of things that were promised. The expansion or addition of playing fields in Washington Irving School, the addition of playing fields to Central Tech. All of these things were in writing, and you had the promise of X number of affordable apartments and housing. And so on paper, it read well. There's a page where you have all of the prominent ministers of the day, their signatures, approving the plan.
Didn't happen.
Well,
some of it happened. Or
if they got rid of the neighborhood,
right,
which was the prime objective. And if you can imagine all the new construction that has gone on from, I would say, the corner of Harrison and University, all the way to the War Memorial. I mean, you're looking at a total transformation. If you look at the East Genesee Street commercial corridor that's anchored with Syracuse Stage, that was a commercial area that served a predominantly African-American neighborhood at one time. And so what happens, you have Kennedy Square, they say that it's not feasible to operate. Gee, you just can't do housing there. It's just not feasible. So they tear it down, and then 38 feet away from the footprint of Kennedy Square, you have luxury apartments, or what I call a community in a box, where you may have your parking, you may have your retail.
True, it's all inside.
You have your coffee house. You have all these things in a nice little protected box, which is a great concept for a developer. And if you look at the university's 20-year plan, those are things that the university put out in their 20-year plan. And once the connective corridor was developed, you found that developers and housing agencies all took advantage of this vision. And a lot of developers, I mean, look at what's happened along the connective corridor between the university and downtown. Look at the development of luxury apartments downtown. And you'll see that we're going through this great change. And I want to get back to one of the things that you mentioned in terms of not trusting. It's not about not trusting. I think that what happens is we need to know certain things about history. Also, we need to know that there are some successes in some of the things that are being done now. I look at the Allen Foundation and what they did with Salt City Market and what they did with the apartments and the rent structure. These were things that George, you and I and others and Reverend Alex, those are things that we were talking about when we were working together under Tom Young.
Yeah.
But the Allen Foundation actually put money to that so you can have affordable space for restaurants of different ethnicities and being able to have the same point of sale system and to be able to have rents upstairs from that facility from $750 to $1,500 or whatever, depending on what you earn. And, I applaud the Allen Foundation for doing that. And also, I think people have to realize that one of the things that happened as a result of what Urban Renewal did and interstates across the country, HUD changed their rules. Therefore, there are certain things that have to be done before HUD will allow, for example, Syracuse Housing Authority to take over 50 acres or more of land and either sell, redevelop, or do whatever with it. There are certain things they have to do through HUD. The original process with 81 and Urban Renewal, you had public comment, but at that time, I really don't believe it meant anything. When Syracuse was handed what it was handed, it was more like, this is how you do it.
Yeah.
And this is how it's going to be done.
Well, let me go back to something you said earlier, and because you're speaking on it, the whole trust thing. And I guess you said that we should understand our history and with the Blueprint 15 and the relocation, and then we'll pivot to 81 in just a second. Because what I'm hearing you say is that people need to know, but who needs to know? And I guess I'm hearing you say as a community who has been impacted, especially because the generations like yourself, there are a lot of people that aren't even aware of the history you even speak of. So there's a two-pronged thing I think happening here. One, who's the arbiter of who's keeping the history, right? Or as Chucky Holstein might say, who's the wisdom keeper? And how do we use that wisdom right now to ensure that the promise is kept so that the trust, because I think you're right to be, for lack of a better word, skeptical about what is going to happen based on history. That's what I'm hearing you say. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but well, I do hear yes, a bit of skepticism.
However, there's an asterisk next to that statement saying that based on funding rules, HUD rules, there's certain things that they cram down the city's throat because they're the funding source, that today those interests are protected by law, are protected by HUD rules. So there's certain things that the housing authority couldn't even do without working with all of their tenants. So therefore, it's a different day.
Right.
Therefore, it's not like comparing apples to apples because we have a lot more say in what's going on today than we did, 50, 60 years ago.
But I still hear concern, though.
Concern is, I think that, like with any plan, I think that, anything on paper looks nice and glitzy. Anything that talks about pulling neighborhoods together and bridging gaps look great. But the devil is in the details. And when you start looking at details of some of the plans, unfortunately, it, in some cases and in some aspects, it looks like we may make some of the same mistakes again. And I believe we have community consensus that people want the highway down.
Right.
However, I think what really should be of concern to people is we wanted it down before we had a plan for what it would look like. So
Right.
Once you look at
mhm.
once you look at the illustration of how everything unfolds when you close 81 going to the city, and the business 81 going to the city, and the roundabout, and all these other things, then it's very different from the way it reads.
Right. So let's talk about specifically what a lot of people are concerned about. Talking to Ken Jackson, UrbanCNY, publisher at UrbanCNY.com. What specifically the community advocates are talking about is, where does the highway spill out when you tear it down? And the most heavily impacted neighborhood is going to be the neighborhood right there around Dr. King School, East Rainer Avenue. And you had people like Destiny, and it's not, well, Destiny, yeah, I would say that group.
They certainly have an interest in this.
Right. They wanted to build a bridge, and Mayor Walsh quickly said that ain't happening. Right, that is not. We've looked at that. That's pie in the sky. Put that aside. And
that was a bridge to nowhere.
And you know, when I looked at it,
if you're gonna do that, then build a bridge over Onondaga Lake.
So just so people are aware, there was a group of individuals, Mitch Lewis among them, Chief Fowler, who proposed raising, instead of tearing down 81, raising it higher so that you would still have the idea of a grid, but you would still have the highway there over, raise it like some 30 feet higher or something like that, like over and create some sort of new streetscape, right? Now, when I looked at that, quite frankly, I said, oh, that to me seemed to be the best of both worlds. But I was quickly reminded that it ain't, like you just said, it was a bridge nowhere. But I'm going to own what I thought I saw and what I thought the possibility was. But it was too late. It was too little too late. It wasn't going to happen. But now there's a concern about the traffic. There's still concern from the community. Again, the public comment period is happening now as we have this conversation, and people get a chance to say what they believe and have their voices heard. Here's my concern, because it's interesting, right? I go back to 695. I wasn't here when that happened, but I know that did not, how 695 is looping around Camillus is not what they intended. But somehow that didn't happen, right? Like they didn't go straight through West Side. They had to loop around. And I assume that was because the neighbors had enough activism to stop that. Am I right about that? I wasn't here.
Well, the thing is that if you take out a map and look at most cities in the United States that have an interstate running through them, there's a 481. You go to DC, 495. There's something that loops. And what that does, it allows commercial traffic to simply hit all the suburbs without going through the center of the city. However, one of the problems that we had in developing our plans is that we were supposed to do the same thing. 481 was supposed to create that loop. And then you also had certain parts that were supposed to intersect with West Street. And Syracuse's transportation system vehicularly would resemble other cities. However, after they saw what they did to the African-American community, I believe that the rest of the city, which at that time had the population and income, said, no, you're not going to do this to my neighborhood. So I think that you had a situation where not only do we have a highway that destroyed neighborhoods, we had a highway that was never completed to fulfill its true purpose. So the only thing it really did, it assisted 60,000 people in moving out of Syracuse and being able to come back and forth with ease.
Which is the concern right now.
Well,
they can't do that. Now,
frankly,
that's why they want
suburban concerns.
Right.
Suburban concerns about urban situations. And now tell me if I'm wrong, I can't go to DeWitt and tell DeWitt, well, gee, what are you doing on the boulevard? You can fire a cannon down there and not hit anyone. I can't go to Camillus or Westvale or Cicero and say, I don't like that road you have going past Lowe's. However, when it comes down to the urban community, when it comes down to the Black community, we have so many helpers
Experts.
that are
I
there
hear you.
saying, "Oh, what you
That's
need this,
deep.
you
I
need
like it.
that,"
I like what
and
you right.
and
Like,
and and my point is this: when you, and maybe I'm jumping topics or whatever, jumping or whatever, but when you go to the plan to take down 81 and you look at what's been developed as Business 81, parts of it look as though they simply took away the elevated portion and put it on the ground. And also, as a part of this design, there's a large wall. Now, tell me if I'm wrong, if the father of this plan, Van Robinson, as he came in from Binghamton and looked down and said, well, this is for us. No, it wasn't for him. He never lived there. So what really happens is that we have people who come, they look at a situation, and I believe that there are certain interests that are more interested in connecting SUNY, the university, financial interests, removing poor people from the center of the city, where poor people have been since the inception of the city. And at the same time,
you don't think
convincing
Van
people
is
that
about
this is
that.
going to be in the best interest of everyone.
But you don't
I
think Van Robinson is about that life, do you? You don't think that that's what his interest was?
Well, I think what happens is that when you come to Syracuse and you look at something and you say, this is what we need. And I think that I would challenge your listeners to look at, if you look at many of the innovations in this city, tell me any of them that were pushed by Native people or embraced.
Yeah.
Many things were bought here and then were served to us as if we were occupied.
Yeah,
So when
but
you
I'm
start
thinking,
talking, so if you start talking about the police coming in and occupying a neighborhood or a community, you also have to talk about people that come from other places and present a new Black vision that was never a part of the vision of people that lived there.
But let me put, now, we have had this discussion for many years. Let me ask you this about that very thing. Are you saying that somebody that did not go to Washington, Irving, Corcoran, Nottingham, or Henniger cannot have an interest in the development and the uplifting of the community? Because I'm speaking specifically about.
I'm not saying that at all.
Right, because I'm speaking specifically about Van, right? In his defense, right? Here's somebody that is fighting for the rights of people as the president. He probably was the president. Well, he was on the council then, but he was also somebody who pretty much put his life on the life as president of the NAACP locally, right? Your job is to help advocate and advance the cause and interest of people of color, Black folk in particular, in this community.
Again, I think he has. Again, what I would ask you is to ask people who are from here, who spent an awful lot of time here,
right?
Whether they were part of the equation. Well, it was not until recently that we had locally born elected public officials. And I'm talking in the last 10 years.
I'm going to ask
who's created a vision. And I have no problem, because without an influx of people with ideas and vision, a city never grows, never thrives, never moves beyond. However, if you do not involve the Native people that live there, and I mean, George, I remember growing up being called a townie. I didn't know what a townie was. I was a kid.
I remember calling you a townie, not you, but you know what I mean. I remember that.
Right, but I think that's one thing that people don't understand.
Right,
they do public policy by color chart and don't understand that there's a whole lot of cultural things that go along with it. So when you have people who were impacted by perhaps living on Fayette Street for their entire lives, or like the Torrance family, or many of the other families that lived in that clustered area where many of us lived at that time. I mean, just give you an example of just how close people were at that time. Many people came from Auburn, Alabama. And there was a time in the late 50s where I'm going to give you 3 names. It would be myself, Jackson family, Cora Thomas, Bruce Conner. We all lived in the same building.
Well, let's go back to Bruce Conner. What isn't he involved in? That's number one. Cora Thomas, what isn't she involved in? So that just blows your theory right out of the water.
No, it does not. What I'm saying is that many of these people were born here, that their families migrated. And my point here is simply, and these are the people that I'm talking about.
Right.
These are people who were born here or spent a substantial part of their life here. But when it comes down to certain policies, economic, socioeconomic, frankly, it's only been in the last decade that native Syracusans have had a role in it. And I'm not saying that to disparage anyone that's come from somewhere else, because doggone it, we are part of this also.
Right.
If you speak with many of the people that I've gone to school with who've left and come back, or who did certain professions here, they would echo the same sentiments. It's not against people who come in and become a part of our community, but doggone it, we need to have a say in it also.
I think Syracuse wants to have it both ways. And that's my problem with that theory that and the reality.
It's not having it both ways. It's about inclusion. It's the same kind of inclusion. It's the same kind of inclusion that you would say for an MBE or WBE. But if you're not dealing with local, then the only thing you're doing is showing me a color chart.
Here's what I'm saying. At what point do you become a Syracusan? Is it? Because let me answer that question. Let me answer that question.
That it's not even a part of the equation, and it's not a part of the conversation.
Because what I'm saying to you
I'm not going there.
Because people,
I'm not going there, George.
People move here.
George,
no. Here's what I'm saying.
I'm not going there.
Here's what I'm trying to tell you.
I'm not going there.
Right, but people, the city spends all kinds of money.
I'm not going there because, first of all, you are taking one piece of this and running with it, as opposed to allowing the full argument to be developed. This has nothing to do with people coming in from other places.
Right. It sounds like that, though.
That's fine. You've done a lot of things. Your name is on a variety of monuments. That's great. My point is that there are many people who've been involved with many things in this community, who were born here, raised here, and did not get those opportunities. And that's a problem. That has nothing to do with you coming here and doing what many people have done to make this place a better place. However, when you relegate the people who live here to a certain status, then don't be surprised one day when you wake up when only 48% of the people are graduating from high school.
You mean black people?
That number has gone up, but
do you mean specifically
value
black
local
folk?
people and local issues and local problems? And frankly, there are so many people that have come from other places to tell us how to deal with our problems and not include us in that. And that would be my point, George. It's inclusion.
Right. So I just want to tie a bow around it, because I do think there's still this issue of, when do you become a Syracusan?
No,
There's not. That's not an issue.
No.
Okay, good. I want to make sure that was clear. So, and the idea that you advanced is that there are, because I was going to ask, I was thinking about what you said, and I think you're really saying black folk who are raised locally, born and raised, are not included in the activities, because I don't see the same thing happening with white folk, unless I'm missing something. I think you're talking specifically about our community. Is that what I'm understanding?
Well, yes, until recently. I mean, until recently. I mean, I have family that's gone to college and now are staying here.
Right.
But there was a time when very few of my peers who had children in college had their children come back here.
Yeah.
And there are reasons for it. And I think that people also have to look at the fact that we have institutions that have not worked very well for our community. And, I respect everything Van Robinson has done and others have done with the NAACP.
Right.
But frankly, if you ask anyone in the community, they'll start singing a Janet Jackson song to you.
What have you done for me lately?
Pretty much, because, I really don't see where in 2021, many of these organizations are working together with the community. If anything, it seems like many organizations that are empowered to work with us at times aren't collaborative in that. And that also creates a problem. And that's why you have things happening in this community. Then after they're done, and agreed to, all of a sudden you have people going, I didn't hear about that. I didn't know about that.
There've been elected officials born and raised in Syracuse forever and ever.
No,
right?
I mean,
Julie,
yes,
look
I'm
at
sorry, yeah,
no. So
right.
I take this,
but not African American
Junie Dunham,
elected.
Herman
Not
what's his name? Edge. I can't think of the first name, but they were all born and raised in Syracuse.
What you're talking about are onesie twosies that served on the council.
You said there was
people
nobody that was. You said it's a recent phenomenon.
But what I'm talking about, George, I think what we're doing here now is going on an untenable argument.
Go ahead.
That I'm not willing to have. I'm not going to argue.
What's the argument you don't want to have?
I'm not having this argument of when you become a Syracusan. I'm just not.
Because you don't think that's because when I hear that, that's what I hear. That you never and I think that's the problem. Right. This is what I hear.
You're not hearing.
But hear me out. Hear me out. What I'm hearing at this a bar that you never get to jump over because you didn't go to Nottingham, Henniger, or Corcoran. That's what I hear. And I think that I know that's not what you said.
That's not making sense to me. I don't understand what that means.
What that means is if you were not born and raised in Syracuse, and what I'm hearing you say, this is what I heard you say, that the people who were born and raised here often are not included at the table when decisions that impact the community are made that have impact on their lives directly. That's what I heard you say.
Bingo.
And I'm taking that to say, but at what point does somebody have the right to be in that conversation and be included? And that's where I feel like you're not hearing that piece.
Oh, I am hearing that piece. But when you're the gatekeeper, how can you ask me when it's appropriate for you to let me in? You see what you're saying?
Mm.
If you're already empowered,
mm-hmm.
if you've been systemically empowered, then how can you ask me?
So
my contemporaries, the people
I hear what you're saying.
With, how can you say that when
now
chances are, if you've gone to those schools until recently, you did not achieve certain things, you had to leave here. It's only been recently that we've been included. Here's
what you know what? There's an elephant in the room. Do you know what that elephant is? There's an elephant in this room. What's the elephant, Ken? I want to know if you can pick it up. The elephant is because you said a magic word. And I want to pick that word up because I think you may say this is an untenable conversation and this is not worth it, but I really think it is.
Because I think they're different
you know what the elephant
apparently of inclusion.
This is the elephant in the room. You said systems. And so what I'm an intuitive listener. You know that. I don't know if you know that. But what I'm really hearing is, because who has the power? Who has the power to decide who's in the conversation and who isn't? And what I'm hearing is that people who, in your view, people who are born and raised and who grew up on Fayette Street or whatever, are not selected by the powers that be. What often happens is you are better at these metaphors than I am, but the new whatever that is, the new kid on the block, whatever, all of a sudden is the person who we now trust and believe over the people that have been talking to them for years and years and years. And they get to then come and pull those other folk together. So we're not identifying, to me, as I'm listening, what we're not identifying is that there's a systemic pattern of exclusion that is not either in the power of either of us. That's what I'm hearing. Is that something you would subscribe to, or you think I'm way off in left field somewhere?
George, what was your first professional job?
I was a manager at KeyBank, I believe.
Okay, and then from KeyBank, where did you go?
City Hall.
And your position was?
Director of Minority Affairs.
And as part of that position, you also were part of a committee.
Correct.
And that committee was?
The Mayor's Minority Affairs Advisory Council.
Right. So when again, it goes back to being systemic.
Right, go ahead.
And it's no one's fault in terms of if there's a job,
But
you're gonna take the job.
but that's my point, right?
As one should take the job and the opportunity.
But that's the point, right?
Too many times, those of us who've grown up here, gone to school and came back are second or third tiered. And that has changed. In recent years, we have many more people who have local roots, who are involved in politics and making policy. I mean, George, you've been here for so many years. Your name is on monuments and other things. No one is asking you to prove your Syracuse bona fide.
Thank you.
I mean, no one has asked you to show that you have an S brand on your shoulder that denotes that you've gone through some process to make you an honorary member of the Salt City.
But I know, Ken, and I know you have the feeling that that's not a useful dialogue, but I think it is, because I think it speaks to a frustration, a real frustration. I don't want to diminish the frustration that exists and has existed. I don't want to diminish that, but I also want to have you recognize that it is also part of a systemic and well, let me just call it, it's systemic that this has happened, systemic racism, whatever you want to call it, but that's the pitting against the, I'm going to choose you over the other person because you're the new shiny toy. And
well, imagine how many people who live in the city of Syracuse look at the African Americans who may be qualified for X, Y, or Z position, and they look at those who are in many of the agencies and many of these organizations that have been created because we're in such a poor condition. They don't see themselves. Mm-hmm. Even at this day and age, they don't see themselves. Mm-hmm. And that's unfortunate. And part of that is that very few of us have the microphone. Mm-hmm. In terms of those of us who are native.
But you have a microphone, and so do I. We both have them. You know, that's why you're here.
And I think that we're coming from, I think we have the same goal. Right. But I think, unfortunately, I think that there's something that people don't understand about this city and about its people and about its African American community, that they don't want to know.
What do we do?
Or don't want to acknowledge. I mean, we're still going on a historic pattern that had people who don't live in the community, don't live in the city, make policy. And again, I'm not going out to DeWitt making policy, but we have, I mean, look at the whole debate over the Krause drug rehabilitation facility. Right. The first ones on the list that were spoken to were business owners in the area, Black clergy, many of whom who did not live in the city of Syracuse. And guess who's at the very end of that list, of that timeline?
The people that lived in the neighborhood?
No, Black elected officials. Mm-hmm. You know who was not on that list?
Who?
TNT.
Oh, the people that do all the advocacy for the neighborhood?
They are the neighborhood planners, as empowered through community development, as empowered by HUD, which years ago came to Syracuse and said, you have to change your way of gathering information from neighborhoods, because we had a community development advisory committee where you had people serving on it for 20 years. Mm-hmm. And it was looked at, and it was pretty much many of the same people and same interests represented over and over again. So the TNT process was modeled after Rochester, where Syracuse was divided up into quadrants, and the people within those quadrants were able to get together as a neighborhood, as a community, and plan. Now, when you don't include those who are empowered to plan, and I think that it wasn't the hospital's fault per se, as much as it may have been the developers. And also, when you do things like that, you have people who are partners with you to help you make those decisions. Mm-hmm. One of the interesting byproducts of all of this and the dialogue that happened, Krause and I are great partners at this point. After that whole situation with the relocation of that facility.
Which, when you think about where it is, that's where it should be, but that's a whole other thing.
Well, that's a whole other thing. I think, unfortunately, again, you know, I've for decades to hear people come in there. I mean, I have shoes that I've worn longer than some people come into Syracuse and want to set policy. I have shoes that are older, and they come in and want to tell and want to make drastic decisions about things and live 30 miles away.
I think
and I think that is a tad bit condescending to those of us who've lived here.
So Ken, given your microphone, my microphone, and what, I mean, you're telling the news and what's going on, how then and obviously we had a whole agenda for what we we're going to talk about, and here's where we are. But I think for the listeners, it's a great service. Here's the point. What do we do about it, right? So what do we do about the perceptions of who gets to be at the table? How do we make and take it back to the issues at hand, right? So let's take all of what you said and put it on the table for what
it's already happening as we speak.
All right, so that's what I'm going to say, because
it's already happening as we speak.
Go ahead.
You know, Khalid Bey, his winning the nomination is part of that response.
Okay.
In terms of people saying, okay, we want something different, and him being proud of his local roots and what he learned while living in Syracuse Housing Authority property, and how he's able to say to people some of the things that are in fact quite uncomfortable, and you don't have African-American or Black candidates ever say, because, you know, we're pretty much programmed to be nice, and nice is good. Mm-hmm. Nobody wants controversy, but unfortunately, or fortunately, sometimes you got to lift up the rug and clean up the dirt.
Are you endorsing? I'm
not endorsing anybody. All I'm saying simply is that if you look at the candidacy, if you look at what he's saying, it mirrors what a lot of people are thinking.
For example,
shouldn't be discounted as not being meaningful. There's something there. Otherwise, there wouldn't be the candidacy, nor would there be the winning of the nomination, which is historic in itself.
Democratic nomination.
However, as he pointed out in an interview with UrbanCNY.com, it's not historic until it manifests itself into a victory. Then call it historic.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's still historic,
and those are his words.
Yeah, and it's still historic in that no one before him ever had that platform as a Democratic major party nomination in this city. But you said that there are some people who are agreeing with what are some of the things that he said that people agree with?
Well, I would say go to his social media or go to the interview on UrbanCNY.com.
You would say that,
you can read the entire interview where he has an awful lot to say. And sometimes people bring up things that need to be discussed. Sometimes it's uncomfortable, but I think that is something that we have to go through.
But I'm asking you, what is there one thing you can say that really shines a light on the discomfort that he's bringing up as a candidate that you think is worthy? Because the interview is there on UrbanCNY.com.
But no, I'm not going to pick one topic, because there is no one topic. I believe that the entire candidacy says something, and that's not an endorsement as much as it is. We should look at everyone and read everything and take out of it what we want to, because that's what interviews are about, and that's what media is about.
Is he the Black Hope?
Excuse me?
Is he the Black Hope? The great Black Hope?
I don't believe in hope.
You don't?
No.
Why not?
I don't. Do or not do.
Okay. The Syracuse police community relations, and all of those things. We got an officer who is suing the police for $33 million. An officer who is highly thought of, at least by the chief and the mayor. What is your take on that? Brandon Hanks suing the police department.
First of all, I think that it's going to take some time before this boondoggle is unraveled, because there are more layers to this parfait than Martha Stewart's kitchen. And I think that even the police and the police chief have acknowledged that there are issues and there are problems. But at the same time, I believe in one of my conversations with the chief, people said that people expect things to be done in 18 months. Problems that have been festering and brewing for decades. So yes, there are problems, but also I believe that those problems are being dealt with. Unfortunately, it's going to be uncomfortable for everybody involved. Is going to be uncomfortable. And I think if you look at the Hanks situation, what you're also seeing in this is, unlike in the past where you had absolute denials and absolute a public campaign to trash someone, you're not seeing that in this case. And I think because of the fact that he has support based on his impact, whether the impact that he's had on the community. However,
born and raised,
you've worked for government. Now, the moment I go from negotiating with you as an employee to filing a lawsuit, everything changes. Everything changes, because then part of the equation is there's a person's job to protect $33 million in city assets. So I believe that at this point, we're looking at a situation that's operating on two different tracks. There's an internal track where they know they have problems and they've acknowledged that. And then there's the external track that is being done through legal means. And then I think there's the third piece, which is the creative tension that it brings to the situation that ultimately will force a change in policing in Syracuse, whether it's done by internally making changes that are done based on our common council, our police department, our mayor, or depending on what's happening, what's discovered in some of these cases, you may have the federal government come in and land with both feet, because we're still under a consent decree based on things that have been going on, again, for decades. So none of this stuff is new. And I think what people really have to look at is, it's quite interesting that there are so many things that have popped up as crises within the last 4 years that have existed for a long time. And in some cases, things were brought up. I think that what we're seeing now is a willingness to engage, confront, and correct. And I think that we have to see how that plays out with all parties.
So I know you said, I don't believe in hope, you do or don't do, but as a longtime Syracusan of 64 years,
yeah,
what does give you hope?
What gives me hope is that if there were a set of indicators that I could point to right now that would foretell Syracuse's future, they would all be up. Our high school graduation rates have jumped. While people talk about crime, during this entire COVID crime spree, our crime rate hasn't mirrored what's happened around the country. While we're here, we feel it, we see it, it becomes news and it's flashed before us over and over again. But I think that's one of the things that that we can look at during this period. Also, some of the things that I'm looking at would be having Central Tech come back online as a STEAM school. I think that's important. I believe that the community engagement that's been done regarding Interstate 81 and even what's happening moving forward will be more engaging with people that live in that direct area as to whether they want a sound barrier wall or whatever. These are going right down to the neighborhood level. If you look at employment, you look at the Amazon Fulfillment Center with 1,000 people. You look at the Amazon Distribution Center in DeWitt with 300 people. If you're a small manufacturer and you manufacture small items for Amazon, at some point you may want to be near one of their fulfillment centers. That fulfillment center might be here. The county executive announced a plan where they're looking at putting soccer fields in the Onondaga Lake Park area, so that, not soccer fields, I'm sorry, lacrosse fields.
Lacrosse field.
Since this is the home of lacrosse, to really turn this into a place where they do lacrosse camps and other types of activities, which is big business, especially for our transportation and leisure and hospitality industries. We have the facility that's opening up probably in several months on Cortland Ave area.
The JMA Wireless
laundry site.
Yeah,
so
the
here we're
JMA
going to
Wireless.
have in the inner city of Syracuse components being made for 5G infrastructure. Also, the county executive looking at wooing a chip maker. You know, this recent shortage of vehicles has been caused by the United States not being able to supply its own microchips for cars. So I look at a lot of things moving in the right direction. The other day, we had 14 miles of streets that are going to be paid for by the state. There is also a commitment to pave other streets that was made weeks ago. There are so many things that are on the drawing board that haven't come to fruition yet due to COVID. Our designation as a Microsoft city, that has not come to fruition yet. Let me see, the JP Morgan Chase grant, those types of things are just starting.
What about can you say more about the JP Morgan Chase grant?
Well, JP Morgan Chase, really, they're looking at coming in and not just simply looking at how you can improve people's lives, but really getting into the minutia of numbers. And, you know, some of these programs in the past would say, okay, just bring us back some raw numbers. And I think what's happening with some of these grant programs now, you're looking at dedicated census tracts, streets as demarcation lines. For example, Microsoft has to be south of Adams Street. You're looking at the people that, for example, through JP Morgan Chase, if people are trained in high tech and then they end up on Warren Street in one of those high tech businesses, then that's part of the success of some of these collaborations. And it's not any one collaboration, it's putting all that stuff together. And then you tie that all in with 17,000 LED street lights that are capable of counting cars, counting people, hosting cameras, and carrying an internet signal. A lot has been done, and there's a lot that has been committed to that has yet to be done. And when those things begin to germinate, I think, and frankly, things that are already germinating, if you look at downtown and the housing that's being built downtown, look at the housing above City Market, that's mixed income, which isn't making it this exclusive place for people that have high incomes. Look at Housing Visions and others in Home Headquarters and the scatter site housing that they're doing, and Syracuse getting $124 million out of the COVID fund to help fund some of these initiatives. I believe that whether it's 81, whether it's all of these little initiatives dotting all over our region, in 5 years, this place is going to be moving on all cylinders. Right now, the job market, there are so many jobs out there, a variety of jobs out there, depending on what your experience is. I've never seen a period like this.
Ken, I'll leave you, or not leave you with this, and I appreciate you giving that perspective, because I'm sure a lot of people are just not aware of many of the things that you said, unless they read the paper or read on UrbanCNY.com. Lastly, when you think about what you and your role is in this community as an organ of media, what do you want people to steal from you or take away from you? Like, what do you, I shouted out all of those people that have gone before you in the role that you have. What do you want people to take from the work you do right now?
Well, I think one thing they can take away from it is that for an African-American owned and urban targeted publication to enter into competitions online for online news, and in 2 different years swept breaking news, and we're competing against Syracuse.com and others. So I think that, for me, is having outside peer review for the work that I do and the work that my partners do, and say that this is just as good as anything else out here on the street, regardless of color. And I think that's what I want to leave people with. And I think that's what I want the legacy of UrbanCNY.com to be, is that we have news that others don't bother dealing with. So if you don't know if the EBT has been expanded, you're going to find it there. If you want to know about what happened with HEAP, you're going to find it there. But at the same time, if you want to be a biochemical engineer, you might find that job posting here also. And then if there are times when you want to hear a hard-hitting opinion, that's what my award-winning column, The Hall Monitor, is about, is wrapped in all of that news and wrapped in all of the information and releases and everything, is that one kernel of opinion that is frankly my voice. And I don't claim to speak for anyone or on behalf of anyone, but that's my column. So hopefully I answered your question.
Well, you did. Ken Jackson, UrbanCNY.com. The cover story this week is the interview, extensive interview he did with Khalid Bey. Khalid Bey, we wish you well in your recovery. Khalid announced this week that he tested positive and is actually, you and I, Ken, he and I had a conversation about the vaccination and all of that. And he's now, he's encouraging people to get vaccinated and said that he will get vaccinated as well. But you can find the complete interview with Khalid Bey on my YouTube page, on my blog, I'm sorry, but also you can find Ken's interview with him and a link to my interview on UrbanCNY.com. Ken Jackson, as always, it's been a pleasure. And so we're going to have you back so we can have another conversation. As always, you're always welcome back. You're welcome back anytime.
All right. Thank you.
Inspiration for the Nation.